The laughter stopped the moment his feet touched the rifle. 32 cadets had walked into that training room expecting a lecture, maybe a PowerPoint presentation, perhaps some grizzled veteran barking orders about trigger discipline. They got something else entirely. They got a lesson they'd carry for the rest of their lives, burned into their memories like a brand. When Staff Sergeant Marcus Delgado entered through the side door that humid Georgia morning, the whispers started immediately. They rippled through the rows of metal chairs like wind through tall grass. Empty sleeves pinned neatly to his shoulders with military precision. A man with no arms, about to teach weapons assembly to the Army's next generation of combat leaders. One cadet in the back row, a muscular kid from Oklahoma named Thompson, nudged his buddy and smirked openly. Another covered her mouth, stifling what might have been a laugh or perhaps genuine shock at the sight before her. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that asked the same silent question. Is this some kind of joke? Delgado heard it all, every whisper, every suppressed snicker, every chair creaking as bodies turned to confirm what their eyes refused to believe. He'd been hearing these sounds for 7 years now, in grocery stores and airports, at VA hospitals and family barbecues. The sounds of people confronting something their minds couldn't quite process. He said nothing. Just walked to the front table where an M4 carbine lay in pieces, like a mechanical puzzle, sat down in the cold metal chair, and calmly removed his boots using his feet alone, hooking each one off with practiced efficiency. If you believe that true strength comes from the heart, not the body, comment warrior below. Marcus Delgado grew up in El Paso, Texas, in a sun-bleached neighborhood where the sound of tools and engines formed the soundtrack of daily life. His father, Roberto, ran a small auto repair shop that had served the community for 30 years. From the time Marcus could hold a wrench, his father taught him that hands were meant for building things, for fixing what was broken, for creating something useful in a world that seemed bent on destruction. Mijo, his father would say, grease streaked across his weathered face. A man's hands tell his story. Keep yours busy with honest work. Ironic, then, that Marcus would become one of the finest weapons specialists the United States Army had ever produced. He enlisted at 18, 3 days after graduating high school, driven by a sense of duty his grandfather had instilled in him with stories of service in Korea. By 24, he could field strip any weapon in the entire arsenal completely blindfolded. Rifles, pistols, machine guns, grenade launchers. His fingers moved with an almost supernatural understanding of mechanisms and tolerances. His squad in the 101st Airborne called him the Surgeon because of the precision in those hands, the almost eerie feel he had for every spring, pin, and bolt. It was said he could tell if a weapon was properly maintained just by the sound it made when he racked the slide. 3 tours in Afghanistan. A silver star for valor during a firefight in Helmand Province. A bronze star with V device for saving a convoy from an ambush that should have killed them all. A reputation that followed him like a faithful shadow wherever he went. But that was before Korengal Valley. Before the grenade that changed everything. Before he became the man with no arms standing in front of recruits young enough to be his children, their eyes full of doubt and something close to pity. Fort Benning's Advanced Weapons Training Program had seen its share of instructors over the decades. Hard men with 1,000-yard stares. Combat veterans with stories written in scars across their bodies, and silences that spoke louder than words. Men who had seen the worst humanity could offer and somehow found a way to keep teaching, keep serving, keep passing down the knowledge that might save the next generation. But when word spread through the barracks and mess halls that the new small arms instructor had no arms at all, skepticism rippled through the incoming class like a stone dropped in still water. The rumors multiplied with each retelling. How could he possibly demonstrate anything? Was this some kind of diversity initiative designed to check a box somewhere? A morale exercise meant to inspire but ultimately useless for actual training? some kind of cruel administrative joke. The cadets in this cycle had trained brutally hard to earn their spots in the program. They'd been selected from hundreds of applicants. They'd expected the best instructors the Army could provide. Instead, they got what looked like a broken man, a symbol of what war takes from soldiers rather than what it creates in them. Cadet First Class Jennifer Okonkwo sat in the front row that morning, her notebook open to a fresh page, pen ready to capture whatever wisdom this session might offer. She'd been raised in a military family, her father a retired command sergeant major who had served 28 years. She'd been taught from childhood to respect service members, especially those who bore the visible marks of sacrifice. But even she, with all her upbringing and values, felt the cognitive dissonance twisting in her stomach. She wanted to believe. But watching Staff Sergeant Delgado walk to the front of the room, his empty sleeves swaying slightly with each step, she couldn't help but wonder, this couldn't possibly work. Could it? Delgado didn't introduce himself with rank or credentials. He didn't rattle off his deployments or awards. He didn't demand respect or try to preempt the doubts he knew filled every mind in that room. He simply said, "You're here to learn weapons. I'm here to teach you. Everything else is noise." His voice was calm, measured, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone, least of all himself. Then he looked at the disassembled M4 carbine laid out on the table before him, 53 components arranged in precise order on the gray surface. The same rifle these cadets had been struggling with for weeks during their preliminary training, their best assembly times hovering stubbornly around 90 seconds despite hours of practice. The same rifle that would become an extension of their bodies if they survived long enough in combat to develop that level of familiarity. The room went absolutely quiet as Delgado lifted his right foot onto the table. His toes, bare now and surprisingly nimble, moved with an unsettling dexterity that seemed almost alien. He gripped the lower receiver between his feet like a man might grip it between skilled hands, and without a word of explanation, he began. The cadets watched in stunned, breathless silence as his feet danced across the components with mechanical precision. The buffer tube clicked into place. The charging handle slid home. The bolt carrier group seated with a satisfying metallic sound that every soldier in that room recognized. Pieces that gave them trouble for minutes at a time seemed to leap into position at the touch of his toes. Nobody laughed now. Nobody whispered. Nobody so much as breathed too loudly, afraid to break the spell of what they were witnessing. 54 seconds. That's how long it took from start to finish. When Staff Sergeant Delgado set the fully assembled M4 on the table and looked up at the class, his expression unchanged, the silence in that room had transformed into something else entirely. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was the silence of shattered assumptions, disbelief painted across young faces, shame burning in the cheeks of those who had smirked, awe widening the eyes of those who understood what they had just witnessed. He'd done it faster than any of them could with two perfectly functioning hands. Faster than some of their instructors at previous duty stations who had decades of experience. Faster than the training standard by nearly 40%. With his feet, Cadet Thompson, the muscular kid from Oklahoma who'd smirked so openly in the back row, felt his face burn with a heat that had nothing to do with the Georgia humidity. He'd been infantry for 3 years before applying to officer candidate school. He considered himself proficient with the M4, prided himself on it. His personal best assembly time was 78 seconds, a number he'd bragged about in the barracks just last week. This man with no arms had just demolished that time and, in doing so, had humiliated every assumption Thompson had ever made about disability, about capability, about what it truly meant to be broken. He couldn't meet the instructor's eyes. He could barely breathe. "I know what you're thinking," Delgado said, his voice still calm, almost gentle in its delivery, like a father explaining something important to confused children. "How did he lose them? What happened over there? You're wondering if I'm bitter. If I wake up every morning and curse the world for taking what was taken from me? You're wondering if I hate the army, if I hate myself, if this is all some kind of elaborate performance to make a point about resilience. He paused, letting the weight of the room settle like dust after an explosion, letting his words find their targets in 32 minds, racing to process what they'd just seen. Quote 7. He stopped, and the silence in the room had become so complete that the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead sounded like thunder. Quote 9. Delgado continued, his voice unwavering despite the weight of the memory pressing against every word. Quote 10 ton. He looked down at his empty sleeves, studying them as if seeing them for the first time, though he'd had 7 years to memorize every fold of that pinned fabric. I figured right, mostly. Rivera made it home to meet his daughter. She's 12 now, fierce as her mother, smart as her father. So did Patterson, Morales, Kim, Blackwell, and Hayes. All 7 of us walked out of that valley alive. Well, he allowed himself a small, self-deprecating smile that somehow made him more human than anything else could have. 6 of them walked. I was carried out on a stretcher, what was left of my arms wrapped in so much gauze I looked like a mummy. But I was alive. We all were. 7 men who should have died that night went home to their families instead. That's not a tragedy. That's a victory. Cadet Okonkwo had tears streaming freely down her face, cutting tracks through the light makeup she'd applied that morning. She didn't bother wiping them away. Neither did half the class. Even Thompson, his jaw clenched so tight it ached, felt moisture blurring his vision. The rest of that day's training session took on a different quality, as if the air itself had changed composition. Delgado moved through the curriculum with the same precision he'd demonstrated in his assembly, covering topics ranging from proper maintenance protocols to combat condition troubleshooting. He showed them techniques they'd never considered, angles and approaches that had never appeared in any manual, methods developed through years of adaptation and countless hours of practice. When cadets struggled with a particular component or sequence, he didn't bark at them or belittle their efforts the way some instructors did. Instead, he sat beside them at their tables, talked them through each step with patient clarity, occasionally using his feet to demonstrate a particular grip or movement that their hands couldn't quite replicate from verbal instruction alone. His toes had become as articulate as most people's fingers, the result of thousands of hours of rehabilitation and sheer, stubborn refusal to accept limitation. By the lunch break, the whispers had started again throughout the training facility, but now they carried an entirely different tone. Reverence had replaced mockery. Wonder had replaced skepticism. Stories of the morning's demonstration spread through the mess hall like wildfire, growing with each retelling, though they hardly needed embellishment. Thompson approached Delgado during the break, finding him alone at a table near the window, his lunch arranged in a way that allowed him to eat using specialized utensils gripped between his feet. The young cadet stood there for a long moment, his patrol cap clutched in both hands, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles, unable to form the words that felt so inadequate for what he needed to say. Quote, Santo 13. He finally managed, his voice rough. Quote, 14. He couldn't finish the sentence, the shame too thick in his throat to allow the word's passage. Delgado simply nodded, his expression holding neither judgment nor triumph, just the calm understanding of a man who had long ago made peace with how the world saw him. I know what you thought, Cadet. Everyone does at first. That's exactly why I demonstrate before I lecture. Actions teach better than words ever could. Remember that when you're leading soldiers of your own someday. Word of that morning's demonstration spread through Fort Benning like a brush fire in dry season. By the end of the first week, Staff Sergeant Delgado's classroom had become something of a pilgrimage site for soldiers across the installation. Senior officers found convenient reasons to observe his training sessions, standing in the back with their arms crossed, watching in silent admiration as a man with no arms taught their future leaders what weapons mastery truly meant. Cadets from other programs began requesting transfers into his sections, willing to rearrange their entire training schedules for the chance to learn from him. Enlisted soldiers who had no business being in an officer training facility somehow found ways to slip into the back rows, just to witness what everyone was talking about. The man who had walked into that classroom as a question mark, a source of doubt and uncomfortable pity, had transformed into an exclamation point that punctuated everything the Army claimed to value: adaptation, determination, mission accomplishment, regardless of obstacles. The commanding general of the training command personally visited Delgado's classroom in the third week, something that had never happened in the program's history. He sat through an entire 2-hour session without saying a word, then shook Delgado's shoulder gently as he left, murmuring something that made the instructor nod with quiet dignity. Later that month, the general wrote a letter recommending Staff Sergeant Delgado for a Meritorious Service Award, citing him as, quote, 6 months later, Cadet Thompson graduated from the program with the highest weapons proficiency scores in his class, shattering records that had stood for nearly a decade. During his commissioning ceremony, standing before an audience of family members, fellow graduates, and senior military leaders, the newly minted Second Lieutenant Thompson was invited to give a brief speech. He'd prepared remarks about leadership, about the challenges ahead, about the honor of serving. But when he stepped to the podium and saw Staff Sergeant Delgado sitting in the third row, those prepared remarks vanished from his mind. Instead, he told the story of his first day in advanced weapons training. He described the smirk on his own face when that armless instructor walked through the door. He described the shame that replaced it 54 seconds later. He described the months that followed, watching a man with no arms outperform and outteach anyone he'd ever encountered. Quote 17. Thompson said, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. Quote 18. In the audience, Marcus Delgado sat quietly, his empty sleeves pinned neatly at his shoulders, watching another generation of warriors find their footing. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The legacy was enough. The 7 men from Korengal Valley still meet every August 14th without fail, no matter where life has taken them. They gather at Rivera's house in San Antonio now, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood where children play in the streets until the streetlights come on. Rivera's daughter Sophia, 12 years old now and fierce as her father ever was, insists on cooking the steaks herself, having learned from her grandmother and refusing any help from the veterans who gather in the backyard around a battered picnic table covered in condensation rings from cold beers. They drink together as the sun sets. They remember together as the stars emerge. They laugh at old jokes and sit in comfortable silence during the moments when words feel insufficient. They watch Marcus Delgado hold his beer bottle between his feet with the same dexterity he uses to assemble rifles, and they wait for the joke they know is coming. Quote 19. He'll ask, timing the delivery perfectly, the same way he's timed it for over a decade now. Quote 20. They groan in unison. They laugh until their sides ache. They raise their glasses to the man who gave everything on that hot August night and somehow, impossibly, found a way to give even more every day since. Sophia sits beside him every year, this girl who exists because of his sacrifice, and she doesn't see a disabled man or a broken soldier. She sees Uncle Marcus, who teaches her card tricks using his feet and never lets her win at chess. She sees the reason she has a father. That's more than enough. That's everything, because that's what warriors do, not because the world asks it of them, not because medals or recognition await, but because something inside them, something unbreakable and eternal, demands it.